The day my father told me he had terminal cancer, I thought it would bring us closer together. Instead, it became the beginning of the most devastating betrayal I'd ever experienced. Dad and I had always had a complicated relationship. After Mom died when I was 16, he remarried quickly, maybe too quickly. Linda seemed nice enough at first, but there was always this underlying tension between us. She never outright disliked me, but she had this way of making little comments, subtle digs that made me feel like an outsider in my own home. When I went to college, I was honestly relieved to get some distance. Over the years, Dad and I maintained a decent relationship, but Linda was always there, always inserting herself into our conversations, always reminding him of things I'd supposedly done wrong years ago. I tried to brush it off. Dad seemed happy with her, and that's what mattered, right? When he got the diagnosis stage 4 pancreatic cancer with maybe 6 months to live, I immediately took time off work to be there for him. This was my chance to really connect with my father, to say all the things we'd never said, to make peace with our past, but Linda had different plans. At first it was subtle. I'd suggest we go for a walk, and she'd remind Dad that the doctor said he needed rest. I'd bring up old memories, happy times from my childhood, and she'd somehow steer the conversation toward my teenage rebellions or the time I got arrested for underage drinking. Every positive moment I tried to create got twisted into something negative. You know how Tyler gets when he doesn't get his way, she'd say to Dad when I'd suggest ordering pizza instead of the bland soup she'd prepared. Remember when he threw that tantrum about the car? The car incident she was referring to happened when I was 17. Dad had promised me his old Honda when he bought a new one, but then gave it to his nephew instead. I was disappointed, sure, but I wasn't 17 anymore. I was 32, trying to spend quality time with my dying father, but Linda kept painting me as this selfish, immature person who only cared about what I could get from Dad. And slowly, horribly, he started to believe her. The change in Dad was gradual but unmistakable. Our conversations became shorter. He stopped asking about my job, my girlfriend Rachel, my life in general. When I'd visit, he'd seem tired, distant. Linda would hover nearby, occasionally making comments about how some people only show up when there's something in it for them. I started bringing a small digital recorder to our visits, initially just to capture Dad's stories, his memories, the things I wanted to preserve after he was gone. But as Linda's behavior became more obvious, I found myself keeping it running during our entire visits, trying to understand what was happening to my relationship with my father. That recorder captured more than I bargained for. One afternoon, I'd stepped out to get Dad's medication from the pharmacy. I thought I'd turned off the recorder, but it was still running when I left it on the kitchen counter. When I listened to it later, I heard Linda's voice clearer than it had ever been. "Thomas, you see how he just leaves you sitting here while he runs off to do whatever he wants? This is exactly what I'm talking about. When you're gone, do you really think he's going to visit your grave? Or is he just going to take whatever money you leave him and forget you ever existed?" Dad's voice was weak, confused. "I don't know, Linda, maybe you're right. He does seem different lately." "Different how? More interested in your will than your well-being." "Thomas, I've watched him. He's not here because he loves you. He's here because he knows you're dying and he wants to make sure he gets his share. But I'm the one who's been taking care of you for 15 years. I'm the one who's held your hand through every doctor's appointment, every sleepless night. I'm the one who truly loves you." The manipulation was so clear, so calculated, it made me physically sick. She was systematically dismantling my father's trust in me during the last months of his life, but she wasn't done. "You know what I think you should do? I think you should change your will. Leave everything to me, and if Tyler really cares about you, he'll understand. But if he throws a fit, if he gets angry and storms out, then you'll know I was right about him all along." I sat in my car outside the pharmacy, listening to this recording, feeling like the ground had opened up beneath me. This woman had been poisoning my father's mind against me for months, maybe years, and now she was pushing him to disinherit me as some kind of twisted test of my character. The worst part, her plan was working. Over the next few weeks, Dad became even more distant. Our conversations dwindled to practically nothing. When I tried to bring up memories, he'd just nod politely. When I tried to tell him I loved him, he'd pat my hand absently like I was a stranger offering condolences. Linda, meanwhile, became more bold in her comments. "It's so nice when Tyler visits," she'd say to Dad while I was sitting right there. "Even if it's only been twice this month." I'd been there 6 times, but Dad's memory was getting fuzzy from the medication and he wouldn't correct her. The recording device became my lifeline to sanity. Every conversation, every visit, I documented everything. And Linda kept talking, kept revealing more of her strategy. "I found Tyler going through your desk yesterday," she told Dad one afternoon while I was supposedly napping on the couch. "I've been looking for a pen to write down Dad's medication schedule. I think he was looking for your will. He seems very concerned about what you're leaving behind. Thomas, I hate to say this, but I think Tyler might be trying to manipulate you." All these visits, all this sudden attention, it started right after your diagnosis, didn't it? Where was he for the past 5 years when you needed him? She was rewriting history, and Dad's illness made him vulnerable to her version of events. In her story, I was a gold digger. She was the devoted wife who'd sacrificed everything for him. The final blow came 3 weeks before Dad died. He called me to his bedroom and with Linda standing behind him with her hand on his shoulder, told me he'd updated his will. Everything, the house, his savings, his life insurance was going to Linda. She's been my companion through everything, he said, his voice hollow. She deserves security. I wanted to scream. I wanted to play every recording I'd made to force him to hear how Linda had manipulated him. But he was dying and he looked so frail, so confused. What would be the point of destroying his final days with the truth? So I just nodded and told him I understood. Linda squeezed his shoulder and gave me a look of pure triumph. Dad passed away on a Tuesday morning in October. I held his hand as he died, but even in those final moments he seemed distant from me, like Linda had erected this invisible wall between us that I could never quite breach. The funeral was planned for Saturday. Linda took charge of everything, playing the grieving widow perfectly. She chose the flowers, the music, the readings. She wrote a eulogy about their beautiful partnership and how Dad had found true love and devotion in his final years. I was allowed to speak too, but Linda made it clear I should keep it brief. "We don't want to tire people out," she said, as if my memories of my own father were somehow less important than her performance. But I had a different plan. The funeral was beautiful, I'll give Linda that. The church was packed with Dad's friends, colleagues, neighbors. Linda sat in the front row, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief, accepting condolences with grace and dignity. She looked every inch the devoted widow, the woman who'd given her best years to caring for my father. When it was my turn to speak, I walked to the podium carrying a small speaker I'd connected to my phone. I started with the eulogy I'd prepared, memories of Dad, what he'd meant to me, how much I'd miss him. Linda smiled approvingly from the front row. Then I said, "But I think the most important thing about my father was his honesty. He always said the truth mattered more than comfort, more than politeness. So in his honor, I want to share some truth with you today." I pressed play on my phone. Linda's voice filled the church crystal clear. "Thomas, you see how he just leaves you sitting here while he runs off to do whatever he wants? This is exactly what I'm talking about. When you're gone, do you really think he's going to visit your grave? Or is he just going to take whatever money you leave him and forget you ever existed?" The church went silent. Linda's face went white. I let the recording play for 30 more seconds, just long enough for everyone to hear her systematic manipulation, her calculated destruction of my relationship with my father. "This," I said into the microphone, "is how my stepmother spent my father's final months, not caring for him but poisoning his mind against his only son. Dad died believing I didn't love him because she convinced him it was true." Linda stood up, started to speak, but I pressed play again. "Leave everything to me, and if Tyler really cares about you, he'll understand. But if he throws a fit, if he gets angry and storms out, then you'll know I was right about him all along." The murmur that went through the church was like a wave. People were looking at Linda with horror, understanding flooding their faces. This woman they'd seen as the devoted caregiver had been systematically destroying a father-son relationship for her own gain. Linda tried to leave, but Dad's brother Michael, a man who'd never liked her anyway, stood up and blocked her path. "I think," he said loudly, "we'd all like to hear the rest of Tyler's eulogy." I played 2 more recordings, Linda talking about how she deserved Dad's money more than his ungrateful son, and her celebration when Dad finally changed his will. 15 years of investment finally paid off. "Thomas, Tyler won't get a penny and he'll never understand why." When the recordings ended, the silence in that church was deafening. Linda was no longer crying into her handkerchief. She was standing frozen, exposed, caught in her own words in front of everyone who'd believed her performance. "My father was a good man," I said finally. "He deserved better than to have his final months poisoned by someone who saw his love as a transaction. He deserved to die knowing his son loved him, not believing he was just another person trying to use him." I walked back to my seat. Linda fled the church and I never saw her again. The recording became evidence in my will contest. It turned out Linda had been pressuring Dad to change his will for months, and several of his friends came forward to say they'd noticed his personality changes, his growing distance from me. The court ruled that Dad had been under undue influence during his illness and the will was overturned. I didn't really care about the money, though I donated most of it to cancer research in Dad's name. What mattered was the truth. At his funeral, in front of everyone who'd known him, the real story finally came out. Linda got exactly what she deserved, nothing but her own words, played back for everyone to hear. Sometimes the best revenge is simply letting people hear the truth they thought no one would ever discover. Dad never got to hear those recordings, never learned how Linda had manipulated him. But at least now everyone who loved him knows that his son never stopped caring, never stopped trying to reach him, even when someone else was working so hard to keep us apart. The truth has a way of surfacing, even when you think it's buried forever, and sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply press play.